Coming up on Choppers Politics.
One of the things that I would warn the Tories against is getting too woke.
Hello, I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, and welcome to Choppers Politics. Firstly, I wanted to say thank you to all of you who have left us reviews on Apple Podcasts, like Johnny has this week. He said, "This programme is one of my weekly pleasures." Well, Johnny, reading comments like that is one of my weekly pleasures too. Now we have a cornucopia of marvellous guests for you on today's episode to talk about this week in Westminster. I'll be joined by Freemason David Staples, the Chief Executive of the Grand Lodge of England, to bust some myths about Freemasonry, and Lord Jones of Birmingham, Digby Jones, the former CBI Director General and Government Minister. And he'll be telling us why, yes, in the depths of a coronavirus recession, we do need a new Royal Yacht Britannia. And former leader of the House of Commons, Andrea Leadsom. She'll be telling us why the public gallery should be flung open for MPs to be able to take part in Commons debates, and why working from home will force a rethink of a £4 billion overhaul of Parliament. But first, tens of thousands of people across the world and the UK have been protesting over the shocking death of a black man, George Floyd, in police custody only 10 days ago in America. You won't, I hope, have missed it. The grim story of a white police officer kneeling on his neck, even after he pleaded that he couldn't breathe. It sparked demonstrations on both sides of the Atlantic. And here to discuss this difficult topic with me is Times columnist, broadcaster, and former chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Trevor Phillips. Trevor Phillips, welcome to Choppers Politics. It's great to have you on. How are you?
I'm fine, and it is a great honour to be on Choppers Politics. I mean, I read what important people and people of substance have said, and I sort of feel that you've let yourself down this week by having me on.
Well, it's Keir Starmer last week. We'll come on to the Labour Party shortly. But thank you so much for coming on. And it's really important you're on this week of all weeks. Can I start with asking you about the dreadful situation in the States with the killing of George Floyd? What a moment. And there have been other cases. Why has it been such a moment? It's greater than the Rodney King murder, which I remember back in LA in 91. It goes back decades.
Yes, I mean, this is extremely important for a variety of reasons. But I think it's important to say why it's not important. It's not important because Trump is president. These things have happened before, as you say, Rodney King, 92, Clinton incarceration, Nixon, LBJ in 68. People writing is not new, and it's not specifically to do with Trump. It is also, I think, not specifically to do with COVID, which people are talking about. I think what is important here is to understand that this is central to America and the way that America is. African Americans have lived for a century and a half with a promise post-slavery that things would change. And they have found that almost nothing changes in terms of their relative position in society. The second thing is that why this particular thing seems so egregious is that you know that the Minneapolis police officer, Derek Chauvin, would never have treated George Floyd's white equivalent in the same way. And what that is telling us is that white America, not all of it, but much of it, still thinks of Black America as a sort of foreign tribe. There are some very specific things that are important here, though. We know we had the recent history of mass incarceration. 1 in 6 Black American men have been in jail. That started under Clinton. There are some very specific things that have happened. The inner cities in the United States have been gentrified, and Black Americans have essentially been forced out of Harlem, out of Motown, Detroit, and all of that has led to a situation in which African Americans, also, by the way, confronted with the spectre of automation, wiping out jobs in warehouses and so on, where they're disproportionately represented, feeling America's leaving them behind.
Is there a read across to the UK? We saw that big demonstration in Hyde Park and outside Parliament on Wednesday.
I think, nobody thinks that a British policeman is going to behave in the way Chauvin did anymore. There may be incidents and there may be accidents and there may be things that happen because of carelessness, but that wanton destruction of life is not something that we would expect here. We don't see the same level of segregation that deny black children access to better schools here. But what we do know is that black groups in this country still feel that they are basically superglued to the bottom rung of society, and that whatever they do, nothing changes. I mean, one of the things that I found most tragic, I suppose is the right word, and it still stays with me, 17 years ago when I became chairman of the Commission for Racial Equality, the people who came into my office and wept were not young black men being persecuted by the police. It was university lecturers who knew that they would never get to be head of department, teachers who knew they'd never become head teachers, doctors who knew they'd never become consultants. And they said, we have done everything the society has asked us, but we know that because of the color of our skins, we are never going to get to that special place. And now that's, I think, where the read across lies. A group of people who, for one reason or another, are convinced that society will never allow them to rise or to realise their talents.
So the answer to this is a political decision as much as it is an operational one for the police in the UK, isn't it? Because there are ways to complain about police brutality. There are also cases there's several I can think of going back over the past 20 years in London, but it's more of an economic debate then for politicians. Is that how you see it?
It's economic, it's organisational. This isn't always somebody else's fault. Some of this is every individual's fault, and every individual could do something themselves. Particularly, if I may say so, a lot of people who have shared their pain about how bad they feel about what happened to George Floyd on radio and television over the last week, I will take it a little bit more seriously if one of these highly paid radio, television presenters, entertainment stars included what the Americans call an inclusion rider in their next big contract. And that inclusion rider says, I'll take your job and I'll take your $1 million or your £1 million a year to present, I don't know, football, if what you do is you assure me and put it in the contract that the crew will be diverse, that I will have black co-hosts, and that you will institute a program that allows people of colour to find their way to the heights that I currently occupy. Now, that I will take seriously.
In an article for The Times you've written overnight, I was struck by that remark from Charles M. Schulz, the Peanuts cartoonist.
I think a lot of the people today who are presenting themselves as great allies and great warriors and making speeches and so on could learn a great deal from Charles M. Schulz, who was the creator of the most widely read cartoon series ever, Peanuts. In 1968, just a few months after the assassination of Martin Luther King, and by the way, the month after the assassination of Robert Kennedy, he decided to give Charlie Brown a black friend. Never happened before. Hadn't happened in any other cartoon. Of course, he was the most popular cartoonist in the world. And he said, I'm going to do this. The southern states where Peanuts was syndicated hated the idea. Particularly, they hated Franklin sitting next to Peppermint Patty, a black boy sitting next to a white girl. Whoa, we don't do that down in the South. And the newspaper owners in the South wanted it changed. Schultz's boss said to him, Charles, can you change this? And Schultz said, well, you know, Larry, I can do that. But you know what? If you ask me to do that, I'm going to quit. And Schultz got his way. Now, my point is that people of power, and that means stars, it also means, by the way, corporate leaders, can make a difference here. They are people with power, particularly in negotiations, and they can say, I'm going to do your job, I'm going to work for you, I'm going to make you money, but in order to persuade me to do that, I need you to add this piece. At the moment, people don't do it, and it seems to me that they're often more concerned about the colour of the roses in the dressing room or the colour of their carpet in their executive office than they are the colour of the people who work for them.
So what you're saying now is tweeting hashtag Black Lives Matter is not enough. There are things you can do in your position to equalise this economic imbalance.
Indeed. One of the things that is very current in the United States, and there are some flaws in it, but I really think this is a serious point they make, is that it is not enough to stand on the sidelines, first of all, cheering on the black folks, and also then telling everybody how much you care if what you do is then go home and watch the latest movie. We take you seriously if you do something that is within your power. And that might mean, by the way, for the ordinary individual who doesn't have star power, remembering that, next time at a family wedding, somebody says something absolutely unconscionable about Asian people or black people, you don't just go, oh, that's just Uncle Jack, he's just like that. Raise it, confront it, don't let it go by.
Trevor Phillips, is there a particular issue amongst the parties regarding BAME representation and looking after the interests of black and minority groups?
Well, I think each party has its own specific problem. But what I would first say is that all of the political classes, and in here I include the media, have a big problem about race. And the big problem is that they're absolutely terrified of it. Nobody wants to say anything in case they get accused of being racist, in which case they'll fold. Whereas actually, the truth is, we need to be more honest, more upfront, and more open about racial differences in our society. Now, unless you actually talk about the situation as it really is, you're not really saying anything at all. And one of the things that we discovered is that the incapacity to deal with race means that we don't deal with issues of unemployment. We don't deal with issues of pay gap. We didn't deal with Rotherham and Rochdale at all. And this is a problem of the whole political class. Now, the individual parties have their own difficulties. Labour obviously has still got a lot of work to do in relation to anti-Semitism. I'm a friend of Keir Starmer's and I have great faith in him. But the truth is, even your friends have to show what they're going to do rather than simply you're believing that they'll solve things. This has gone on too long. And at the moment, it still characterises the Labour Party. We've got to fix it. The Tories, I think, have all sorts of other difficulties which are to do with their history. But, to be honest, and I think one of the things that I would warn Tories against is getting too woke. When I hear a Tory cabinet minister saying Black Lives Matter, I just want to say, stop. No, don't do that. Don't do that. It doesn't work, mate. Just be honest and straightforward. But I think if I had to say honestly, the biggest issue in the political firmament is for Labour to deal with whatever the Equality and Human Rights Commission tells it to do, and do it honestly and quickly.
Well, yes, I mean, just quickly on that, you are suspended, aren't you, from the Labour Party at the moment? Is that the case, or have you rejoined? I know Keir Starmer's your friend.
I have been suspended, and it tells you something about the inefficiency of the Labour Party, having responded to the charges, which, for example, include using the words Enoch Powell in a pamphlet which relates the last 50 years of racial relations history. Apparently, that's a crime in the Labour Party.
You can't even mention the fact
you're not allowed to.
I'm sure you've been critical of his Rivers of Blood speech.
Yeah, but apparently, just mentioning his name is now a thought crime in the Labour Party. I think that we will have to see. I'm suspended. To be honest, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that Keir and the party deal with the toxicity around race, that they deal with anti-Semitism, and by the way, that they stop taking dictation from extremists who tell them what to say on race because they are so afraid to take a straightforward line. And that's going to be a big test for the Labour leadership.
Definitely. Just finally, Trevor Phillips, you are sitting on an inquiry, aren't you, with Public Health England into the disproportionate number of BAME victims from COVID-19. That's right, isn't it?
Well, I was asked to provide some expert support. I mean, I'm basically a geek. I run a couple of companies that do data science and data analytics. That's where I'm happy. And we have technology to be able to analyze the infections and deaths in a way that will focus on specific groups. So, for example, there's no point saying blacks have an elevated risk, because within the group blacks, they include Caribbean people like me and African people who, according to what we already know, I am likely to have a risk that is 3 times as high as my African cousins. So we need detailed, sophisticated analysis to disaggregate these things. And that it happens that we have the technology to do that. Now, I've been asked to help with that. One of the problems is that the whole argument about ethnicity and COVID has now been turned into a sort of political debate, and that's held up the actual science and the research that we can do. I'm very anxious about that, because the longer we wait to discover who is actually really at risk, the longer we expose people who should be protected. At the moment, we shield people who are over 70. What happens if we discover people who are younger from an ethnic minority carry exactly the same risk as white people over 70? It means that we've spent 2-3 months not shielding those people because we've been messing about with political arguments. And that is a real danger here.
Goodness gracious. Well, listen, Trevor Phillips, thank you so much for coming on Choppers Politics. It's been extraordinary to talk to you and real food for thought for listeners. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Now, 1.3 kilometres, that's 0.8 miles in old imperial measurements, or 69 double-decker buses end to end, or 54 tennis courts in a straight line. It's also the length of the queue if you have 650 MPs queuing up to vote, practicing 2-metre social distancing, as they did this week when they were asked to return to Parliament by the Leader of the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg. It took 40 minutes to vote. That's a lot of time for busy people like MPs. So I thought I'd catch up with Jacob Rees-Mogg's predecessor in that job, Andrea Leadsom, the former Leader of the House of Commons and a former Business Secretary, to talk about voting and restoration and renewal of the House of Parliament. Andrea Leadsom, welcome to Choppers Politics. We're talking remotely, not in a pub when we last met, but how are you?
Yeah, really well, thank you. It's a bit gloomy here today, but yeah, still great.
Yes, still great. You've been voting this week, haven't you, with other MPs? I wondered if you felt a smidgen of sympathy for your successor as Leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's so hard herding 641 MPs around, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it's been obviously very controversial because there are very genuine debates to be had about whether you should keep everybody away from Parliament or whether you should bring them back to do their job. I certainly fall down on the side of we need to get back into Parliament. And, for all those people who've emailed me saying, what on earth are you doing? I would just say, the reality is that if you're not in Parliament, you can't do the kind of spontaneous things like if you're in the chamber, you can bob if you want to raise a constituency issue, you can intervene on a minister, you can actually properly hold them to account, you can challenge them and ask them the questions for which they don't have prepared answers. And for all of the benefits of the virtual Parliament, it didn't allow for any of that spontaneity. And even worse than that, actually, because everything had to be kind of pre-arranged, you could only ever go into a ballot to ask a question, even in the case of an urgent question. And then if your name was drawn out of the hat, you then had to submit what you wanted to say, and then you could say it. So all of the opportunity to think of it on the day, to refer to a constituent case and so on, has all been taken away by the virtual Parliament. So I'm delighted that we're actually going back into the Palace of Westminster.
So your advice is to keep calm and carry on. I would say, though, that the numbers of MPs in the chamber has not changed. It's still 50, isn't it? So the idea of bobbing and catching a speaker's eye to stand up, that still is very hard because you can't get into the chamber to do so. So you're still disenfranchised in that, aren't you?
Yeah, and that is a big problem. And I've raised with Jacob the fact that we should be using the galleries. I mean, there's no reason in the past, he's a great lover of history. And in the past, members of Parliament would speak from the galleries. That would certainly increase the capacity. There's also the benches at the back of the chamber that could accommodate MPs who could then speak and bob, and even behind the glass. I mean, you could have temporary microphones up there and enable members to speak from there. It's not beyond the wit of man. Technology can do it. Are you
saying the press gallery should cede their seats to MPs? Is that what's going on?
No, of course not. No, I wouldn't dream of doing that. No, the press gallery would obviously. But I mean, they're all up there where you guys sit, but the other side, there's
the
space
Peers
up
gallery,
there.
the Visitors gallery,
Indeed.
all those galleries. Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So you could fit a lot more people in. And also, there is some discussion about the issue of how distant we should be from each other. Now, I don't want to get involved in the scientific argument, but the World Health Organization, as I understand it, advocates 1 metre distance. Well, if we did move to WHO recommendations, that would give us a lot more capacity.
Yes, it would. I think the problem with Parliament is you're all shouting at each other in a small space.
Yes.
You're the worst kind of...
Yeah.
Because
Ranters.
I think, like church choirs, for example, they're vulnerable. If you're in an orchestra, you're blowing hard through an instrument. Any form of projection in a small space is good for the virus and bad for us. Of course, the COVID-19 crisis has meant that we are reconsidering how we work. I'm working from home, as I have been for the past 3 months. Well, I've been in a couple of times into London. How will this, do you think, affect the R&R, the restoration and renewal idea, this £5 or £6 billion project to refurbish the House of Parliament? Do you think it might see that being scaled back?
Well, the restoration and renewal has to happen. There's no doubt about that. As Leader of the Commons introducing that bill to have all of us move out of the Palace of Westminster so that the mechanical and engineering works can be done is as valid today as it was then. I mean, nothing's changed about the fact that working remotely possibly means you need less space, and I would certainly advocate cutting back on the decant costs as much as we possibly can. So if we do move to Richmond House, which at the moment is the plan, that is to be rebuilt to accommodate all of the parliamentarians and all of their staff and so on. You could really scale that back, and you could perhaps just have 30 or 40% of the current space that we have and require people to work from home, and use the sort of experience of lockdown to demonstrate how easy it would be to do that. But actually, where the palace is concerned, most of the work, about 80% of the work to restore it, is around things like removing asbestos. It's around renewing the sewers. It's all of the mechanics of the house. It's making it safe. It's making it properly fireproof. I mean, since 2008, we've had something like 40 fire incidents. And the only reason the palace has its fire certificate is because we have 24/7 fire patrols of human beings who walk around looking for fires. We saw with the appalling fire at Notre Dame how easy it would be to lose this, UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the most famous buildings in the world, due to a fire problem.
But set against that, Andrea Leadsom, you've got how it looks. £5 or £6 billion being spent on, in quotes, MPs' offices in what will be a very deep recession coming towards us.
And I completely agree. Value for money has got to be at the heart of this, which was why it was so difficult to get that bill through Parliament. There were lots of people who are very concerned, myself included, about the cost of it. But the reality is it is a World UNESCO Heritage Site. It has, in normal times, it has over 1 million visitors a year. It is something that is the seat of our democracy. It's one of the most famous buildings in the world. It's not about MPs' offices. It's about making sure that the building is safe and restored for future generations. The reality is that if MPs decided to overturn the R&R bill and to not move out of the palace, the reality is that we don't have a proper contingency. So any day of the week, you've got the whole of the basement of the palace running about something like 400 yards through the basement is all open and stuffed full of asbestos, like lagged pipes, wiring, sewage, electrical, gas, etc. And then there are something like 100 chimneys. There's 1,000 chimneys in total, and 100 of them are stuffed full of wires and pipes as well, going up through the palace. So any day of the week, you could have a fire travelling up there. You could have an asbestos leak. The first time I went down into the basement, there was a massive sewage leak and there was sewage pouring down. And I was absolutely sure that the project team had done that just for my benefit, to demonstrate to me how bad it was down there. But I mean, there's no doubt it's a very, very serious issue. And if we had to move out suddenly because of an asbestos leak, the contingency arrangements, such as they are not good enough for a long-term solution. So actually, Richmond House is the way forward.
That's halfway along Whitehall, where the Department of Health used to be based, I should say, for others who don't know where it is.
Yeah, that's right. And not just because we own the building, but also because it's a secure area. And of course, with the terrible murder of PC Keith Palmer, since then, the security advice is that MPs have to be within the secure perimeter at all times.
And that secure zone might take in the Red Lion pub at some point,
your hangout,
which could mean that this podcast can't return there.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think you could probably do that within the palace itself then?
Within the palace. Well, the rules were we couldn't when we first started it, hence the pub, but we'll see if they change, and perhaps with your support they might change. You've been a minister for 6 years, and now you're restarting your role on the backbenches. What's the big campaigning issue you're looking to get your teeth stuck into, Andrea Leadsom?
Well, for me, it's always been my passion for the early years. So for over 20 years, I've been really pushing for more to be done to support families with new babies. There are so many potential opportunities, from helping families with mental health issues who are struggling to cope with a newborn baby. Up to 30% of domestic violence starts during pregnancy. 1 in 5 mums and 1 in 10 dads suffer from mental health problems when they have a new baby. And at the moment, we don't do nearly enough to provide support. And the outcomes for that can be devastating for the baby, because of the fact that the baby's brain development is so vital in that critical period between conception and the age of 2. So the more support we can give for parents to help them with, whether it's breastfeeding advice, whether it's mental health advice, whether it's drug and alcohol reduction advice, or even just, giving them a bit of support because they're struggling to cope with, how do you deal with this new baby? How do you deal with the overwhelming problem of getting no sleep and worrying about your relationship with your partner or about your job? So all of those things, I think, if we provided more wraparound support, we would be able to promote a generation after generation of emotionally healthy human beings.
Well, on that note, on an important note there, and perhaps that's more of the future than this dreadful COVID-19 crisis. Perhaps you're seeing a chance there to change the world for the better. Andrea Leadsom, thank you so much for coming on Choppers Politics. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Now, stay with us. Coming up, we have Lord Jones of Birmingham, Digby Jones, a former head of the CBI and a government minister, talking about Brexit, business and boats. Right after this.
Go beyond the headlines with the Telegraph's daily coronavirus podcast, a roundup of the latest news on the pandemic from our leading journalists, with analysis on the impact on health, business and travel every weekday evening. Search Coronavirus the Latest on your podcast app.
Right, we're back. Lord Jones, Digby Jones, was the Director General of the CBI from 2000 to 2006, and he was a minister in Gordon Brown's government covering trade. So he has a unique view on the effect of the COVID-19 crisis on business and his idea to boost morale in these difficult COVID-19 blighted times. Digby Jones, welcome to Choppers Politics. I hope this finds you well.
Yes, and thank you for having me, actually, Chris. And hello, everybody. It's great to be with you again.
You were saying just off mic there that you can only cope with watching the daily number 10 press conference with Boris Johnson after a good glass of claret. Just looking though at what the government's been up to, you were a goat, you're a member of Gordon Brown's government, but you weren't part of the Labour Party. You were one of the government of all the talents people. What's your view on how they're doing it? I mean, you know how hard it can be in making the Whitehall departments move to your will. I mean, do you think that the furlough scheme's gone well? The quarantine, which starts on Monday, is that a worry for you?
I think the first thing was, at the start, they gave business time. If you get the argument that it's only businesses, especially small ones, which generate the growth, generate the profits, pay the tax, build the schools and hospitals, it's only employment in the private sector that generates the wealth. They gave business time with the furlough system, and then with business loans guaranteed by the government, and then with self-employment help. And by the way, all of it could have been a little bit better. All of it could have been a little bit better executed and applied. But basically, it gave business time. That was a massive win. And then secondly, I think they clearly had this lockdown to achieve. And I think it's being proved. I said it at the time, actually, although with remarkable, but I have to say unconscious prescience, is I said it'll be easier getting this country to go into lockdown than it will to bring them out of it.
Yeah.
And the reason is they could identify with a war, they were frightened they'd catch this thing and die, and they understood that this was a way to try and stop it. It's massively different when they're now understanding how it's not been beaten, but if in Second World War terms, we're now we've just landed on the beaches in Normandy and it's all upside, as opposed to it's Dunkirk. And
Yes.
So the problem is, how do you release the country back into normality when you know as a government minister it's still out there and it's still going to kill people? I think in one or two areas they've had a problem with having to listen to scientists, and only you and I are perfect, Chris. At the end of the day, scientists get it wrong. And was Ferguson right with his you're going to have 250, 500,000 deaths if you don't do something? Was he right? Was he wrong?
We'll never know if those were right.
We'll never know. And then the other one is they relied on the NHS for delivery. And of course, whilst I sincerely hope not one person in the UK will criticise the front line in the NHS, I mean, they have not just been brilliant, but I'd give PCs to every one of them. I mean, they've been fabulous. But it has shown up one or two of the age-old problems with the NHS, which is procurement and delivery. And in procurement and delivery, it's never shone. Any attempt to reform has always been met with, you want to privatise it, which isn't true. But it has needed big reform on the administration, procurement and delivery side of the NHS. And the problem is it's shown it up, hasn't it? It's shown it up.
Do you think we're leaving lockdown too quickly?
Well, it's about risk. And I'm one of those who believe that lockdown should be coming to an end more quickly. I'm a great believer in relying on the common sense of the people. I do believe that you've got to have social distancing until you get a vaccine.
Yeah.
I think until you get a vaccine, we've got to have social distancing. That means no football crowds, no racing crowds, cinemas and theatres, restaurants, all with social distancing. Public transport, big issue. But do I think Britain can have a non-lockdown, socially distanced, wealth-creative environment? Yes, I do. I think the public will vote with its feet. I think we saw it at the weekend, didn't we? And we've seen it today with the demos about the tragic death of the guy in America. At the end of the day, I think people vote with their feet. And I'll tell you, in the entire appraisal of this, we're all going to have PhDs in hindsight. Everyone.
Well, listen, it's great to have you on, Digby Jones, Lord Jones of Birmingham. I've got to ask you one thing, though. At the weekend, you were saying that we should have a new Royal Yacht Britannia. Just briefly, why?
I was Minister of State for Trade. I got round 90-odd countries, banging the drum for British business, brand Britain. And I can tell you, a Royal Yacht Britannia moored in a harbour, asking big decision makers on board with the atmosphere of something that no other country has got, which is the British royal family. Believe me, I don't care what the politically correct liberati from Metropolitan Islington say. Believe me, it sells. It sells around the world like very few other things. What I would do is I'd say this is a three-way split on 100 million. I'd have a third of it from the National Lottery. I'd have a third of it from the taxpayer. And I'd have a third of it from British business, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who'll benefit as well. And I'd put the hat round, and I'd put the hat round to a small business and say, just give a few, Bob. And I'd put the hat round to the big fellas and say, give a lot more. And we would have a three-way split. And then, yes, the royal family would have it, especially Her Majesty, but so it would always be available for business to promote its wares and for other parts of the public realm to promote their wares. Universities, very good example. And at the same time, I would, without doubt, make it a training ship. So we would have apprentices learning their craft as it was being built, everything from electrics to engineering to boilermaker, everything. And then on board, I would have so much of the catering, so much of the navigation, so much of the engineering, so much of the hospitality done by apprentices, so that they get a quality training which the nation then benefits from.
Why now, in the depths of a recession, when money will be scarce?
If you can get over the third of the cost to the taxpayer and get the doomsayers to see that for what it is, which is an investment in the future, why now? One of the biggest morale boosts you can have, because the nation is going to come through this in better shape if we actually believe in ourselves. That's what we need, to believe in ourselves. Notice I didn't say pull together and everything else. That's all old-fashioned cliche. And I don't expect governments to get free pass and not be interrogated. But I do believe that if we have a self-belief and stop knocking ourselves, we have a damn good chance in this country, and the Royal Yacht at this moment would just be one of those good quality delivery messages.
Digby Jones, just finally, does the royal family want one?
Well, I haven't asked them.
You're in the House of Lords. You're very well connected.
I know, and now and again at events I certainly meet them. Well, I did before all the lockdown stuff, but I wouldn't pretend to be in any way connected. I would suggest the Prime Minister asks Her Majesty at one of his weekly private audiences. I would have thought that she would have to ask her eldest son, and there might be a bit of a persuasion job to be done there. But I would have thought that possibly the second in line might just say, "Yeah, what a good idea, but let's get it intimated into the youth. Let's get this brought in for the whole country. This is not an elitist thing, and it's not an old age thing. This is something that 30 and 40-year-old teenagers could relate to as well."
Digby Jones, on that optimistic note about Britain sailing into the future in a new Royal Yacht Britannia, thank you so much for coming on Choppers Politics. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Chris, and the very best to everybody.
Now, behind the scenes in this COVID-19 crisis, lots of groups have been getting out there delivering food parcels and packages across the UK. And one group doing just that are the Freemasons. I thought it'd be quite interesting to hear about them and their work on this podcast. We've been now with David Staples, the Chief Executive of the Grand Lodge of England. Welcome to the podcast, David Staples, the Chief Executive of the United Grand Lodge of England. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Chris. Thanks very much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on. I was really struck by some information I was sent this week about the Freemasons and the work they're doing during COVID-19, because the Freemasons have get such a tough rep, I think, probably unfairly in the UK. You're doing a lot of work for handing out donations of 300,000 meals, 38 tons of food. How are you sort of getting over the idea of aprons and funny handshakes, all this kind of thing, which is probably in the past?
Well, Freemasons is one of the oldest social and charitable organisations in the world, and we're open to those of all backgrounds. Our roots lie really in the traditions of the medieval stonemasons who built our cathedrals and castles. And our aim is to empower our members to be the best that they can be, both for themselves and for the society around them. And COVID is obviously a massive issue in this country, and we are doing exactly what we have done for the last 3 centuries, doing what we can as individuals and an organisation to get out there and help the communities from which we're drawn. In April, we focused our efforts primarily on producing personal protective equipment for both care homes and for hospitals. At the very start, our members were turning over the production lines of their companies to produce visors. We've sourced and produced tens of thousands of bits of PPE for all sorts of organisations, primarily care homes, because that was sort of left on the back burner a little bit. And then in May, computer tablets, we were donating over 1,000 to hospitals. I'm a consultant physician in my spare time, as it were, at Peterborough Hospital. And with the situation of not allowing visitors in, there was a terrible situation where people could not talk to their families adequately. They couldn't see their loved ones. And so we've provided over 1,000 tablets to allow that face-to-face communication at distance. And that's been incredibly well appreciated. In June, we're concentrating on food and food banks. We've donated over 300,000 meals and 38 tons of food during this current pandemic. And that's not just dipping our hands in our pockets and giving things to people. We've turned over the kitchens of our Masonic halls, and Freemasons are actually in there cooking meals and delivering food to the vulnerable. This is what Freemasonry and charity is actually about. Nobody should go hungry in 2020. Nobody should have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. And if our organisation is able to play a small part in helping alleviate some of that suffering, then we shall do so.
This is extraordinary work you're doing. How do you deal with this legacy then of these unfair ideas about the Masons when you're doing the work?
Well, my job as the Chief Executive really is in two parts. Firstly, to modernise the headquarters operation and sort of the administration. And secondly, to help the public understand what Freemasonry is, what we do, how we do it, and who we are. And we are a society that's been around for a very long time. We want our members to be part of something unique and make lifelong friends. We eat, we drink, and we meet together. And by following centuries-old traditions, we challenge and develop ourselves. And by working together, we help and build our communities. So we are an organisation that is now very much into transparency, showing people who we are, showing people what we've done for a long time. And I think we've done that very well over certainly the last couple of years or so.
So the idea of a different handshake is wrong. These are wrong things to talk about the Masons?
Well, handshakes are part of our ceremonies. There's 3 ceremonies that we do, and they're there to teach us how to be better people. So the first degree ceremony, when we bring somebody into Freemasonry, is all about telling our prospective candidates that we're born equal. Everybody comes into the world the same way, and at that point, everybody's equal. But some of those people do better than others, and the first degree ceremony reminds us that it's the job of those people who have done better in life to look after those people who have not done so well. And that's where one of our fundamental concepts of charity comes from. The second degree ceremony teaches us the importance of improving yourself through education, making yourself a better person, more fit to serve society around them. And the third degree reminds us that we're mortal. We have one life, and we need to use that life for the right purpose and be remembered for the right reasons. We have a lot of symbolism within Freemasonry, and the handshake dates back to medieval times when stonemasons were illiterate but had to prove their skill within a craft. And they would have a token to prove to their overseer when they were building whatever cathedral or castle it was they were building that they'd attained a certain level of expertise. And within our ceremonies, those are used to determine Freemasons of different levels. I've been a Freemason for over 22 years. I'm a consultant physician. I meet probably 60 or 70 new people every week. Nobody's ever given me a Masonic handshake outside of a lodge meeting, and I wouldn't expect them to.
Look, thank you so much. It's been great to hear about your work, and best of luck, and keep doing this fantastic work during this crisis. It's vitally needed. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you to my guests, Trevor Phillips, Andrea Leadsom, Lord Jones of Birmingham, and of course David Staples, all for taking the time to talk to Choppers Politics. And thanks also to my producers, Elliot Lampitt, Louisa Wells, and of course Theo Luludis. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Don't forget, if you work for the NHS, you can get a free 6-month digital subscription to the Telegraph as our small way of saying thank you for being just great. Details of that offer are in the show notes of this episode. And everyone else can get 30 days free access to our content by going to telegraph.co.uk/chopper and signing up. Don't forget, if you can, always buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph. You won't regret it. Until next time, cheerio!